Well, I was lucky to get good horses and good customers and able to trick the judges. That is kind of like nobody had done that before, and it's, you know, it's easier like to be the first one. It'd be hard to do today, as competitive as it is. As good a horses as they got, and as good a young horseman as they're going now. I don't think anybody will ever beat that record. If they do, they're sure a good hand.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of good hands and good horses.
Tell me about this guy that's sitting right down here, because this is
You know, I want to tell before about Ken.
all right.
We bought a little horse in the start of the drought in the 50s. They was bringing those horses out of Pecos and the Davis Mountains and selling them here in the Midland at the sale ring. And there was a little paint come in, probably 13 hands. And paint, I just thought he was a pony. So I bought him for Ken, and come find out he was just wild as a rat. He'd got under a gate, and I said he's wild as a rat, and so we named him Rat. And he grew up probably 15 and a half hands tall and was just full of cow. And when Ken was about 4 or 5, he took him for his horse. And he could really rope on him or cut on him or turn back on him. And I had him turn back for me one day, and I'd bought a string of good Hereford bulls, and I wanted to work my cutting horses on because they're fresh. Boy, we worked at everything then, chickens or dogs or whatever. We worked them because we couldn't keep enough cattle for to train on. And Ken was turning back on Rat. And I don't know, one of these bulls just quit me and broke and run to the other end of the arena, and Ken and Rat was going to head him off. Well, they connected, and down they went. And all you could see out of that pod was Rat's rear sticking up, and Ken was down, still in the saddle, and touched the bull, and directly Rat come up and jumped the bull and kept running. Ken just circled, didn't pull him up, nothing, come run back, pulled at me and stopped and looked over at me and said, "Whew, I thought I was going to come out of there riding a bull." And I knew right then he had enough grit to make a cowboy. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about Midland. I bet I'm the only man here that remembers burros running up and down the back alleys and eating out of the trash barrels, and a bunch of them. And we'd all catch them and ride them, and we lost a lot of bridles that way because we'd get bucked off and they'd get away with their bridle. But I found about a 1930 cattleman and was reading it. I gave it to Helen, and it talked about her grandmother, and it told about stopping a train in Baird, Texas, and unloading 2 carloads of burros to dip them for tick, coming off the King Ranch, going to Midland, Texas, and some people was developing Cloverdale, going to put in an irrigation system that's going to pump water into the lake, and they wanted those burros to tromp that lake and get it where it hold water. And they went broke. When they did, they just opened the gate and turned those burros out, and they come to town and spent their life there up and down those back alleys. But anyway, I bet nobody remembers them here but me. And the thing that used to go on here was all the ranchers would come in for the kids to go to school, and they'd bring their colts in and ride them during school. And Homer Ingham, Dad had a ranch off down by Stiles, and he come in here, and Homer was breaking 3 or 4 colts, and they'd always go out to the stockyards and play. One day they got to trying to run up the loading chute, and there was a boxcar spotted with the door open. Well, they were going to try to jump across into that boxcar, and the Bronx wouldn't refuse. And Homer backed his horse up and really got him going, and he jumped across that little gap into the boxcar. Well, then they couldn't get him out. And about that time, a train locomotive hooked on to the boxcars and left out with Homer on his horse. And when they got to Big Springs, Homer got some brakemen to help him, and they put the bullboard down and got behind his horse and got him off. And he went to a phone and called his dad. And his dad said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm in Big Spring. You're going to have to get a trailer and come get me." He said, "How'd you get there?" He said, "Well, I rode my horse." He said, "Well, you get back home same way you got over there." And he said he had a tired bronc the next morning when he got back to Midland. But at another time I was working for Homer in Las Vegas, New Mexico, at Watchers, and Buck York, a Midland rancher and oil man, had a good, big, nice ranch. And he came over. I'd been winning cuttings with Chickasha Mike, my first cutting horse. And he came over and said, "We got to go to a funeral and would like to get you to work that herd." And it was a 3-year-old heifer. Back then, they didn't breed until there's 2s. And there's 3-year-olds were the first calves. And said, "Would you come over and kind of be in charge and man me those?" They had 3 different brands, and man them and then brand them. And his uncle was with him, and he was a sure enough good old cowman and a good old cowboy. And I said, "Mr. York, I'll do it if your uncle will kind of look over my shoulder and keep me from making any mistakes." I was about 22 years old and pretty green. And they had these cattle in 3 pastures on the river. And I got there, and they had a big crew. And nobody consulted me about how to drive or anything. They just went, all of them went up there, and we come down and gathered that pasture and threw it. And when we had them together, he sent some men to the next pasture to come bring it down toward the river. And we just kept going like this. We wound up with 700 cows, and they were going to cross the river to a roundup ground. And by the time we got to the river, half of them baby calves was back behind the herd. And when we started to cross that river, the cows went and the calves turned back and broke in a run. No way you can hold 700 baby calves. And we was all day, and that real cold norther come up. And so that night, we finally just turned the cows back loose and took them back to the further pasture and left the gates all open. And we're going to let them try to work it out for us. And we were trying to build a fire that night to get the cowboys warm was all wet, and Mr. York was shaking like you wouldn't believe. And I said, Mr. York, how'd you come you let me get in that big a wreck? He said, Buster, I know a whole lot about working cattle, if I could just remember it. And I know what he's talking about now.
Buster, before I let you go, a while ago we were visiting back over here at the library,
yeah.
and you were talking about that box.
Another tale on me. That is John Zurich's oat bin on the porch there in his horseshoeing deal. And when I went to New Mexico, John Zurich was considered the best horseman in New Mexico. He had gone with a stud called Old Mike, a thoroughbred horse, at a 4-year-old to the state fair at Albuquerque, and he'd won the cutting, the cow horse race, the tie-down calf roping, and his sister won the ladies barrel race. And Chickasha Mike was my first cutting horse, and he was out of an old Mike Meyer. And but anyway, I was working for Buck Brett, and he had about a 4-year-old pretty done horse that had come 4 6s, and he was bucking them off. So they had me to ride him, and I spent a lot of time with him. I'd go out after supper and ride him, fool with him, play with him. Boy, he was a natural handling little horse. And I got him where I could take the bridle off, and I could break him in a run and slide him to a stop and spin him, turn him any way he wanted. And Buck brought John Zurich out one day and wanted me to show him to him. So I did. And he said, would you bring that horse into Clayton next week at the rodeo and exhibit him? And Buck spoke up and said, yes, he'll do it. And so I did. And Sam Brett had a little old roping saddle with a candle on it, about like that, and no swells. And so I put that on him, and I ran him and stopped him and spun him, and the crowd really liked it. And I thought, well, if they like that, I'm going to show them something. So I get on the racetrack, and I really open him up. And as I get in front of the grandstand, I slide him to a stop. I'm against the rail on the racetrack, and I spin him to turn him, and he jumps the rail, and I fall off of him backwards in front of the crowd. But when they asked my wife, says, is he hurt? She said, nothing but his pride.